You're about to hear 13 disturbing horror stories that take place at summer camp. Before I begin, I wanted to say you can now listen to my stories on Spotify and other podcast platforms. The links are in the description. It was a chilly night at Camp Greenwood, and as a counselor, I was responsible for making sure all the campers were safe and comfortable. Tonight, Jake and Sarah, two 14-year-old campers, needed to use the bathroom, which was a short walk from our main campsite. Carrying only a flashlight and the camp walkie-talkie, I led them down the path, under the dense canopy of ancient trees that barely let the moonlight through. As we walked, the woods were unusually silent, except for the crunch of leaves under our feet. That's when I first heard it. A low, menacing growl from somewhere behind us. I stopped, signaling for Jake and Sarah to be quiet. My heart was pounding, not yet sure what the sound was. Then in a flash of terror, a huge bear burst from the underbrush, its eyes wild and its jaws snapping. Panic erupted. The bear was massive, easily the biggest I'd ever seen, and it was ravenous. It lunged, and I shouted for the kids to run. We sprinted back towards the camp, but in the chaos, I heard a horrifying scream. Glancing back, I saw Jake fall as the bear swiped at him with its massive paw. There was no time to stop. It was a gut-wrenching decision, but I had to get Sarah to safety. We reached a nearby staff car, and I fumbled with the keys, my hand shaking violently. As we scrambled inside, the bear slammed against the vehicle, its heavy body rocking the car back and forth. Sarah was crying, her face white with shock, as I started the car and honked the horn, desperately trying to scare it off. Nothing worked. In a desperate attempt to escape, I slammed the gas pedal, but the car lurched and hit a tree stump, jerking to a harsh stop. The bear climbed on top of the car, its claws scraping against the metal roof, creating a sound like nails on a chalkboard. We were trapped inside, screaming as the roof began to dent under the bear's weight. Then, as suddenly as it had attacked, the bear leaped off and disappeared into the dark woods. We thought the ordeal might be over. After a few moments, believing the bear had retreated, we cautiously exited the car. That's when, with a heart-stopping rush of leaves, the bear charged out again. It happened so fast, I saw it sink its teeth into Sarah, and she screamed. A sound that would haunt me forever. I yelled, threw rocks, anything to distract it, but it was too late for her. Sprinting back towards the camp, my lungs burned with the cold night air as I shouted at the top of my lungs for the campers to take cover. The words barely left my lips when I heard the guttural growl of the bear close behind, a sound so raw and primal that it seemed to shake the very ground beneath my feet. The bear was a dark silhouette against the night, a creature of muscle and fur, driven by a ferocity that turned my blood to ice. As the campers hid into their tents, the bear barreled into the campsite, its heavy paws thudding on the soft earth with a hunter's grace. It was an avalanche of power and rage, unstoppable and overwhelming. Its eyes, reflecting a glint of moonlight, focused intently on the nearest tent. With a roar that split the night, it reared up on its hind legs, taller than any man, and swiped with claws as sharp as knives. The fabric of the tent shredded like paper, and the screams that followed were chilling, brief, and abruptly silenced. The sound of tearing and the heavy, wet noise of the bear's feeding were punctuated by the muffled cries and whimpering from the other tents. Campers huddled in their shelters, paralyzed by fear, as the bear moved to another tent. It pawed at the ground, grunting and snuffling, its snout pushing against the fabric. A small tear appeared, and the bear's snout became a gaping maw of teeth and saliva. With one swipe, the tent was torn open, and the bear lunged inside. The screams that erupted were quickly muffled by the sounds of a struggle, the snapping of bones, and the bear's deep, satisfied grunts. The campsite became a tableau of horror. I could see shadows moving frantically inside the tents, campers desperately trying to find a corner to hide in, knowing there was nowhere safe. The bear's growls and the ripping of canvas were the only sounds in the clearing, drowning out the soft whimpers of terror from the surviving campers. With a final roar that seemed to shake the leaves from the trees, the bear lumbered back into the dense thicket, its hulking shape disappearing into the shadows. For a long moment, there was silence, broken only by the soft crying of the campers and the distant call of a night bird, ignorant of the carnage that had unfolded in the darkness. The smell of blood hung thick in the air, and the soil of the campsite was churned and stained. We were left in a state of shock. The bear was still out there, somewhere in the inky depths of the forest. Its appetite whetted, its presence a looming threat over our shattered sanctuary. I grabbed the walkie-talkie with trembling hands and called for emergency help. Park rangers, police, an ambulance. The night turned into a blur of flashing lights and urgent voices as they arrived, securing the camp and tending to the traumatized campers. They searched for the bear but found nothing. It had vanished into the wilderness. 24 hours later, the camp was evacuated, and the bear still hadn't been found. The incident left us all shaken, with a heavy heart for the lives brutally impacted. The wilderness, once a place of adventure and beauty, now held a shadow of fear and tragic loss. The haunting realization that nature can turn so violently unpredictable was a lesson I'd never forget. I was 14 when I first went to Ravenwood Camp, and nothing about it screamed ordinary. The second I stepped off the bus, a waft of musty pine and damp earth hit me like a soggy, cold blanket. The camp leaders, with their overly cheery faces and bright yellow shirts, herded us into the main hall for orientation. It felt more like a sorting ceremony than a welcome party. They split us into groups by drawing names from an old felt hat that looked like it could have been a prop in a horror movie. My group, dubbed the Wanderers, was a mixed bag. There was Lucy, the self-appointed leader. I could tell she instantly didn't like me, but I had no idea why. Mira, who was as quiet as a church mouse. And then there were the twins, Charlotte and Claire, inseparable and mischievous. I somehow was the odd one out, the one they all poked fun at because I didn't seem to fit in anywhere. Our first activity was a hike in the surrounding woods. The camp counselor, Mr. Hopper, a wiry man with spectacles that magnified his bug-like eyes, briefed us with a stern warning. Stick to the path, kids, and whatever you do, avoid the edge of Raven's Cliff. It's slippery, steep, and not to be messed with. His tone made it clear this was no mere suggestion. The trail was a narrow, winding path through thick bristles of undergrowth and towering trees that blocked out most of the sunlight. It was eerily quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves or distant bird call. As we walked, the twins whispered about the legendary hauntings of Ravenwood, how kids heard whispers at night and saw shadows moving in the dark. It was all typical camp ghost stories, but as we walked through the woods, it seemed like the trees were staring at me, the branches waving at us to go back. We'd gone pretty deep when Lucy decided she was bored of the path Mr. Hopper told us to stick to. "Let's make our own trail," she declared, a challenging glint in her eye as she looked directly at me. I hesitated, remembering the warning about the cliff, but the others were already following Lucy, their voices echoing with excitement. I didn't want to be left behind or called a coward, so I followed. The further we strayed, the thicker and more tangled the woods became. Thorny branches snagged our clothes, and roots seemed to grab at our ankles. It wasn't long before we realized we were lost. The forest had swallowed us whole. That's when we stumbled upon it, a slide, its top lost in the overgrowth, its metal sides cold and slightly rusted. It twisted upwards into the trees, ending somewhere out of sight. "Bet you wouldn't dare go down that," Lucy teased. They all laughed, goading me to climb up the rusty steps and prove myself. "Sure, no problem," I said, as I climbed to the top. "Sure, whatever," I said as I climbed up the stairs. I looked down the slide, and it seemed normal enough, but looped around some bushes so I couldn't see where it ended. A sudden gust of wind shook the slide, and it wobbled. It made me hesitate, but at the same time, I figured what's the worst that could happen? "Just slide down, it'll be epic," Lucy goaded with a smirk that felt colder than the steel beneath her. Her words felt like daggers, not the playful jabs friends exchanged. It was mean through and through. I never like it when people talk to me that way. And no matter how big or tough you are, I'm not going to take orders from anyone. So, Even though I could do it, I decided there and then I wouldn't, to spite her. With a resolve that felt foreign to my limbs, I climbed down, their laughter chasing me like echoes of thunder. Whatever. I don't need this, I said, burning with embarrassment but not daring to show it. I took off, leaving their sneers and snickers behind, aiming for the camp but not really knowing where my feet were leading me. A new path, one that seemed untouched by the usual camp commotion, beckoned me, promising a getaway from the bully and her minions. And that's when I found it. I'd found the cliff they told us to avoid. And then I saw it, the end of the slide hanging precariously over the sheer drop. A silent executioner awaiting its next victim. My eyes shot up to the top, where Lucy sat, still oblivious to the grim fate that awaited. I sprinted back, my throat raw with screams. "Lucy, don't!" But she just scoffed, gesturing rudely in my direction, her arrogance blinding her to the terror in my eyes. Desperate to breach the distance between us, I sprinted at full speed, screaming like I've never screamed before. My plea broke as I stumbled through the underbrush, the image of her on that slide like a bad omen. She turned, about to push off. "Stop! Stop! Stop!" I yelled, inches from disaster. She paused, perhaps seeing the real fear etched on my face. My words came out in a tumble. "You'll fall off the cliff, I swear. It's not a joke." Disbelief warred with suspicion in her eyes, but my tears must have convinced her because she hesitated, then huffed a dismissive, "Fine, whatever," and clambered down from the slide. I showed her, pointing with a trembling hand at where the slide ended, right over the edge. "That's messed up," she said, her voice a shadow of its former confidence. Together we pushed the slide off the cliff, sending it crashing into the foggy nothingness, ensuring no one else would fall for such a screwed-up trick. After that, Lucy said we were cool, and wanted us to hang, but the taste of her mockery lingered. I found a new group, a band of campers who laughed with you, not at you. Who would place a slide at death's door? What kind of mind seeks to lure the unsuspecting into the void? Whoever they were, they understood the shadows of Ravenwood all too well, and that's the most screwed up part of all. I've been a dive instructor for years, seen all sorts of weird stuff that the sea spits up or folks dump overboard. But nothing, and I mean nothing, compares to the job I got one late October out at Old Briar Lake. They called me in to look for a kid who'd gone missing, a poor little boy called Corey, last seen playing by the edge. Old Briar was never known for being deep. I geared up, the cold of the water biting through my suit as I slipped beneath the surface. The lake was calm. Too calm. Sunlight didn't reach the bottom. The beam of my flashlight cut through the dark like a lone car on a country road at midnight. Down and down I went, my bubbles the only sound in the eerie silence. The lake was unnaturally deep, much more than I imagined. There was thick vegetation, the type that could tangle you and keep you under. And then I saw them, human-shaped shadows lined up at the bottom. They were chained by their ankles. My heart hammered against my ribs as I moved closer. Their hair waved in the water. Their eyes stared unblinking. There were maybe 6 or 7 of them. And as I drew near, I reached out to touch a woman, in her 30s. Her face was hard, not what I expected. That was a Hail Mary moment. As I realized they weren't real, but mannequins. I checked each one. The last mannequin was strange. It was smaller than the rest. A kid, dressed in a red sweater and blue jeans. The same outfit they said Corey was wearing when he was last seen. I remember how my breath caught in my throat, the hiss of my regulator suddenly loud in the silence. The clothes were real, not part of the mannequin. Soggy, clinging to the plastic like a second skin. My light hovered over the face, and I swear, for a split second, I thought I saw eyes flicker open in the murky water. I pushed up, hard, my fins stirring up the silt from the bottom. I had to get out. Had to get air and light and life. My ascent was too fast. Safety stops be damned. As I rose, I felt something grasp my foot. It clutched hold of me, trying to keep me down. It felt like a hand pulling me. I kicked, but it wouldn't let go. I began to panic. I thrashed wildly, every kick more frantic than the last. My breaths grew shallow and rapid, the precious air in my lungs slipping away faster than I could ascend. The pressure in my chest grew unbearable, my body screaming for oxygen. I tried to focus, to steady my breathing, but the grip tightened, a relentless anchor pulling me further from the life-giving surface. The light above seemed to grow dimmer, the water colder and more oppressive. My vision began to blur, dark spots dancing at the edges as my body cried out for air. Every muscle ached, my limbs heavy and unresponsive. The world around me shrank to the singular sensation of the grip on my foot and the crushing need to breathe. I forced myself to stay calm, to think of a way out. But rational thought was a distant memory, drowned out by the overwhelming fear. My kicks grew weaker, each movement a monumental effort. The hand seemed to tighten, as if sensing my dwindling strength, just when I thought I couldn't hold on any longer. When the darkness threatened to overtake me, the grip suddenly loosened. It was gone as quickly as it had appeared, leaving only the phantom sensation and my pounding heart. With the last of my strength, I propelled myself upward, the light growing brighter with each agonizing second. My chest felt like it would explode, the urge to breathe overpowering. But I was close, so close. Finally, I broke the surface, gasping for air, the sweet relief filling my lungs. I gulped down breath after breath, the terror of the deep still fresh in my mind. Another diver took over. I warned him about what I'd seen. He went down and was there for an extended time. When he came back up, he reported there were no mannequins. A few hours later, Corey was found, alive, playing on his own, without a care in the world. I myself haven't been back to that lake. I can't explain what I saw, and I get a lot of PTSD, but I do know I'm never going back to that lake. Ever. Bible summer camp. It was hell. The bus ride to the camp was pretty standard, just trees whipping past and the occasional rundown farmhouse. But when the gates of Camp Redemption came into view, shivers ran down my spine like little spiders scuttling across my back. It wasn't the name that got me. No. It was the giant old-timey cross towering over the entrance. I should have known from the get-go this place was intense. It was my first year there, and I was already pegged as the new disciple on day one. The cabins were ancient, wood faded and creaking, and the whole place was ringed by these massive, gnarled trees that seemed to watch us like silent, judgmental giants. We were welcomed with this strange, solemn ceremony where they sprinkled us with water that was ice cold, whispering words that sounded more like incantations than any prayer I'd heard before. Every new kid got a wooden cross to wear, heavy and rough against the skin. The counselors had this intense vibe, too. They'd look at you, and it was like they could see right through to your sins or something. During the days, we'd have these long, silent hikes through the woods, following a path marked with crosses. Sometimes we'd stop at these little shrines with candles burning even in the daylight, and they'd tell us to confess things I didn't even understand, being 13 and all. At night, we'd gather around bonfires to listen to tales of sacrifice and redemption that left more chills than warmth. Then there were the prayers. Endless, droning prayers in a chapel that felt too close, like the walls were leaning in. The stained glass windows never showed scenes of heaven, but of judgment and dark, haunting images that I'd try to forget as soon as I blinked. It was in this surreal, strict atmosphere that we sat down for the Last Supper. They draped this scratchy burlap tunic over me, and I played along, thinking it was all some harmless roleplay. Everyone was quiet except for the sound of forks scraping plates and this undercurrent of whispers that you couldn't quite catch. The table was super long, wooden, and old as the hills. It was set like we were actually back in biblical times, and I remember thinking, man, they really go all in here. But then there was the kid next to me. I noticed him because he wouldn't eat, just kept fidgeting with his cup, his eyes darting around like he was planning to bolt or something. Suddenly he stands up and the room goes dead quiet, like the calm before a storm. He's glaring at the kid playing Jesus, and there's this intense look in his eyes, like real hate. Out of nowhere, he just lunges, swinging his fist. It was like a scene from some thriller, not Bible camp. The sound of the hit was sickening, and Jesus stumbled back, cracking his head right open on the edge of a chair, blood mixing with the fake wine on the floor. That moment, man, it broke something in me. Like, if this was religion, if this was faith, it was twisted and dark and nothing I wanted part of. I steered clear of the Judas kid after that. I gave the whole religion thing a big miss. Nightmares followed me after camp, scenes of betrayal and blood that felt way too real for a kid's summer getaway. Ever since then, I've hated anything to do with Jesus. So there we were, at Camp Green, just me and a couple of other kids, chilling by the lake with fishing rods in our hands, hoping to catch something that wasn't a boot or a can. The lake was all calm and quiet, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I was just leaning back, trying to look all cool with my cap flipped backwards, and suddenly my rod jerks so hard it almost flies out of my hands. Like, I'm talking a full-on, you've got a freaking shark kind of pull. It scared the crap out of me, man. My heart was pounding like it wanted out of my chest, and my hands gripped the rod so tight my knuckles went all white. The other kids rushed over, all bug-eyed and yelling, "Hold on, bro!" They grabbed onto the rod, too, and for a hot sec, it was like we were all in this epic tug-of-war with the Loch Ness Monster or something. The rod was bending like crazy, and I swear I thought it was going to snap. But the thing in the lake, it was way stronger than us. I mean, it was just toying with us, you know. So we freak out and let go, and that rod gets yanked out of our hands like it's nothing. We watched it get dragged across the lake, cutting through the water like a motorboat. And then, get this, the camp counselors decide it's a brilliant idea to have swim time. Right then, like they couldn't see what just happened. They're all cheerful, saying, "Come on, the water's fine." No freaking way, dude. I wasn't about to become fish food. None of us were. We just stood there, shaking our heads like, nope, no way. But some of the kids got in, right? They're splashing around, oblivious, and I'm just glued to the spot, staring at that rod skimming over the surface towards them. My gut was all twisted up, expecting to see some water beast explode out of the lake. But nothing happened. The rod just bobbed around like it was being pulled by a ghost or whatever. I don't care what anyone says. I'm never setting a toe in that water. That lake's got secrets, and I'm not about to be the one who finds out what they are. Alright, so this one time at camp, things got real horror movie, like fast. I was hanging out, doing the usual camp stuff, kayaking, complaining about the bugs, you know. But then, this sleek black car rolls up, quiet like a shadow. It was so out of place among the dusty camp vans, it might as well have had a big, blinking sign that said suspicious. There was this kid, Rich, and yeah, he was loaded. Like, oh, my sneakers cost more than your house, Rich. I saw his dad's fancy car when he got dropped off, all shiny and expensive. But this car that pulled up wasn't his dad's. It was dark, like something a supervillain would drive. I'm telling you, it happened so fast. 1 minute Rich was there, the next. These big burly dudes jump out of the car and grab him. It was like watching a hawk snatch a rabbit or something. They just took him and threw him in the car like he was a sack of potatoes. They peeled out of there, kicking up dust and leaving us all staring. Me and a couple of other kids jumped into one of the camp's beat-up old cars. Jackson took the wheel. He was only 15, but drove like he was in a police chase or something. We're tearing down these winding roads, and I'm in the back, snapping pics with my phone, hoping we can show the cops or something. We called it in, our voices all shaky and tripping over the words, telling the police about the kidnapping. They told us to stop following. But adrenaline was pumping, and nobody was about to listen. We were like amateur detectives, but this wasn't a game. Then, as quick as we found them, we lost them. It was like the earth just swallowed that black car whole. But then, boom, there it was again, weaving like some sort of crazed snake on the road ahead. Jackson floored it, trying to keep up, but the black car started driving like it was in a mad dash from hell itself. It was swerving, like the driver was fighting with the steering wheel, or like there was something real bad happening inside that car. Jackson backed off. We couldn't risk crashing. Our hearts were thudding against our ribs so hard I thought mine would burst out of my chest. The black car zoomed off, and all we could do was watch it disappear over the horizon. We did everything we could, and gave the police the pictures we snapped, but it was like that car was a ghost. No trace anywhere. The thing is, deep down, we all knew. Knew in the way the air turns cold before a storm, and the silence that falls after a scream. There was something about the way those guys handled him. Something final in their movements. And when the cops came back to us, faces drawn and voices somber, we didn't need to hear the words to understand the truth. It was a few days later when they found Rich. They said it was just a few miles from camp, in a thicket off the old logging road where the trees are so dense it's like the sun forgets to shine. They didn't tell us much, just that there was a body, and it was him. They used words like tragedy and loss, but all I heard was final and gone. The nights after that were the worst. I'd see that black car in the dark behind my eyelids, every time a little closer, every time a little more terrifying. The silent scream that twisted my dreams became a nightly occurrence. My subconscious replaying what I wished I could have done. Run faster, shouted louder, done something, anything to change the ending of this story. All we had left of Rich was the memory of a kid with a whole life ahead of him, cut short on a summer day that was supposed to be full of nothing more serious than fishing and campfires. Woof woof. There was something super off about Camp Whisperwood, and it wasn't just the icky lake water or the spider-infested cabins. His name was Woof Woof, the camp's dog. He was this massive, snarly beast that looked like he'd jumped straight out of a werewolf movie. And that name, like a bad joke that made your spine crawl instead of making you laugh. Woof Woof was always tied up to this huge oak tree, right where the forest got so thick you couldn't see through it. His leash was this heavy chain that clinked and rattled with every move he made. Whenever anyone got too close, he'd go into this freaky, intense bark that sounded more like a roar. Even the counselors kept their distance, though Mr. Henson, the owner, would just chuckle and say, "Oh, Woof Woof's just talking, that's all. He's friendly as a butterfly." But one day, Woof Woof went all crazy-eyed at Emily, this girl from Cabin 6. She froze like a statue as the dog snarled at her, spit flying from his mouth. Mr. Henson was there in a flash, pulling Woof Woof back, laughing it off, saying the dog was just being protective. But Emily didn't think it was funny. None of us did. The way he barked, it was like a warning, telling us to stay far, far away. Despite the danger signs, I kind of felt sorry for the dog. No creature should look that sad and angry all the time, right? So one night, I got this idea to set him free. I thought maybe if he wasn't tied up, he'd chill out, find some rabbits to chase or something. I sneaked out, my heart hammering so loud I was sure it would wake up the whole camp. The chain was colder and heavier than I expected, like it was made of ice and lead. When I unclipped it, the dog didn't roar or run. He just stood there, his dark eyes boring into mine. For a second, I thought I'd done the right thing. But then something shifted in those eyes, and it was like all the wild, angry night had poured into him. There was no sign of the sad, chained-up dog I thought I knew. Instead, there was this ferocity, this untamed rage that had been coiling up inside him, just waiting for a moment like this. My hand was still stretched out from when I'd unleashed him, and in a heartbeat, he was on me. His teeth sank into my arm, and the world became a blur of pain and terror. I screamed, a high-pitched sound I barely recognized as my own. The dog's growls were deep and guttural. My arm clamped in his jaws. The counselors came running, their shouts sounding distant over the blood roaring in my ears. I was on the ground now, the damp earth pressing against my cheek. The dog was still on top of me, his breath hot and his presence heavy. It felt like ages before they managed to pull him off, his teeth dragging across my skin one last time before releasing. They said I was lucky, that it could have been worse. But as I lay there shivering, waiting for the ambulance, I didn't feel lucky. I felt marked, scarred by the truth that sometimes the things we think are caged for no reason have claws and teeth for a purpose. As they carried me away on a stretcher, the cool night air did nothing to soothe the burning lines the dog had etched into my arm. A week later, I was told he was put down. It was horrible to think I'd caused the dog's death, but my mom made it clear it was his fault, not mine. I never went back to the camp, but whenever I'm outside and every time I hear the faintest bark in the wind, I wonder if that dog is out there, somehow asking for forgiveness. Or maybe it was just me, wishing for my own. Man, Camp Lakewood was a scorcher that summer, like the sun had a vendetta against us. Our cabin was this rickety old tinderbox. No AC, just a bunch of grimy windows and one creaky door. We were all roasting in our bunks, sweat sticking to the sheets. That's when Chandler, the guy who always thought he knew better, started on about leaving the door open. We were all like, dude, no way, because bugs, you know? But also because every camper whispered about the stuff that lurked outside when the moon was high. Just campfire tales to freak out the newbies. But at night, every snapped twig or rustle in the bushes felt like a ghost story come to life. Chandler wouldn't shut up about it, though. He said we were all being babies, afraid of the boogeyman or something. Kept going on about needing fresh air, scoffing at us for buying into the creepy junk about something out there that might snatch us. Full of hot air, he'd say, grinning like a fool. Nothing's gonna get you, except maybe a raccoon. He laughed. But there's something about the dark, when you can't see what's out there, can't know for sure. That makes you believe in the possibility of anything. So we told him, lock the windows, shut the door, don't be an idiot, Chandler. He fought us on it, his temper flaring as hot as the cabin. In the end, he got his way because none of us wanted to wrestle with his stubborn butt all night. We settled into our beds, uneasy but exhausted. The door cracked open just enough to let the darkness creep in. Morning came with a blast of heat and a slice of panic. Chandler's bunk was empty, sheets thrown back, his boots still by the side like he'd just stepped out of them. We thought maybe he'd gone for an early dip in the lake or to prank the girls' cabin, but no, Chandler never showed. The counselors turned the camp upside down, every cabin, every trail, shouting his name until it was just a sound that didn't mean anything anymore. The cops came, asked questions we couldn't answer, and searched the woods with dogs that just whined and cowered. Chandler was gone, like a puff of smoke in a strong wind, like he'd been part of the night whispers and had just faded away. And now, whenever I hear someone say it's too hot, that we should open a window or a door to the night, I feel that edge of fear, wondering if Chandler's out there somewhere, or if something out there has him. Landing a summer job at 16, you'd expect some nerves, right? Excitement, too. But at Camp Whispering Pines from the get-go, things were off. Not just the place, but the people, especially those in charge. The camp was deep in the woods, the kind of remote that made your cell signal laugh and disappear. When the rickety old bus pulled into camp, fog was already swallowing up the edges of everything, like the forest itself was alive and breathing. The place looked frozen in time. with cabins that had seen better days and a lake that was eerily still. Mr. Henderson, the camp director, met us with a smile. He seemed friendly at first. He was an older guy with a thick beard and a constant, unsettling habit of whispering to himself when he thought no one was watching. He handed out room assignments with a flick of his wrist, his fingers stained with something dark. I told myself it was just ink. The first red flag was the way the other counselors acted during our welcome dinner. They barely spoke above a whisper, their movements synchronized like they were part of some weird silent film. Whenever I tried to start a conversation, they'd answer with vague, non-committal phrases or just smile and nod, their eyes darting around like they were scared of being overheard. Training began under the watch of Mrs. Cole, the assistant director. She insisted on us practicing emergency drills way past midnight, as if expecting some disaster to strike specifically when it was pitch black outside. Training was weird, to say the least. We didn't learn about first aid or fire safety. Instead, Mrs. Cole gathered us under the fading light and began explaining our responsibilities. "You're not just here to guide. You're here to protect," she said, her eyes piercing through each of us. "There are things in these woods that don't take kindly to intruders." We were taught specific chants and rituals that Mrs. Cole claimed would keep us safe from whatever lurked beyond the campgrounds. We practiced these rituals at dawn and dusk, the times she claimed the veil between our world and the others was thinnest. One evening, as we stood by the lake practicing a protective chant, I noticed Mr. Henderson pacing nervously. The mist began to thicken, creeping towards us like living tendrils. He scrambled to arrange us in a circle, urging us to chant louder. The air filled with a palpable tension, and for a moment, I thought I saw shadows, moving without their owners in the mist. Training also included learning to navigate the camp in complete silence to avoid drawing their attention, as Mr. Henderson put it. We were shown how to create barriers with salt and line the windows and doorways of our cabins with protective symbols. The most chilling exercise was the mock rescue drill. Mrs. Cole would take one of us deep into the woods and leave us there, hidden. The rest of the group had to find the lost counselor, using nothing but the protective rituals we'd learned to ward off the dark presences we were told roamed the forest. The urgency wasn't simulated. Mrs. Cole's eyes were wild with genuine fear every time we performed this drill. The nights were the worst. Lying in bed, I could hear soft footsteps outside and the distant echoes of chanting. Whether from my fellow counselors or something else, I was too terrified to check. Each day added a layer of fear and confusion. As the week progressed, I realized we weren't keeping the camp safe from bears or storms, but from ancient nameless things that whispered from the shadows, hungry and watching. By the end of the week, the eerie atmosphere and the bizarre training had taken its toll on me. Sleepless nights filled with unsettling noises and days crowded with creepy rituals had me on edge. The counselors, who seemed more like cult members than camp staff, were deeply entrenched in their roles, accepting the weirdness around them with a zeal that only added to my discomfort. This job wasn't what I signed up for, and everything about Camp Whispering Pines screamed that something was very wrong. Deciding to leave felt like the only sane choice I had left. I approached Mr. Henderson, trying to keep my voice steady as I told him I didn't think I could handle the job and wanted to leave. I packed my things quietly, the weight of their stares heavy on my back. I felt the eyes of the other counselors on me, their expressions a mix of pity and disdain. No one said goodbye. It was as if I had become a ghost among them, already forgotten, or worse, erased. As the bus pulled away, carrying me back to normalcy, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease, wondering if I had indeed escaped or if the shadows from Camp Whispering Pines would follow me home. So there we were, crackling logs breaking the night's silence. I remember how the flames danced, casting eerie shadows on everyone's faces as we settled into our sleeping bags. We'd been warned earlier that day. 2 hikers had come by, telling not to light any fires because the brush was bone dry. But Mark, our so-called leader, waved off the warnings, all cocky, saying a little fire wouldn't hurt. It was kind of perfect, honestly. The firelight flickering while everyone started swapping ghost stories. The scarier, the better. That's when we heard footsteps crunching towards us. And those same 2 hikers reappeared, looking uneasy but joining us. They even pitched in with a chilling tale of their own, about a camper who'd vanished in these woods decades ago, supposedly snatched by the shadows themselves. As they spoke, a sudden gust of wind swept through the campsite, and before anyone could react, a spark flew from the fire and landed on a nearby tree. It was like watching a nightmare unfold in slow motion. The tree caught with a sickening ease, flames licking upwards, crackling fiercely as it set off a terrifying chain reaction. Panic surged as the fire spread from one tree to another, faster than seemed possible. "Move!" someone screamed. It was chaos. Everyone scrambling to their feet, coughing from the smoke, eyes stinging. We dashed for the cars, but it was too late. Flames had encircled us, cutting off any path to escape. The heat was intense, a wall of fire trapping us in. One of the cars, parked too close to the edge, exploded into a fireball, sending everyone reeling back from the blast. With no way out, we sprinted towards the small pond nearby. Jumping in, the water felt like a cruel joke, barely deep enough to cover us if we lay flat. But it was our only chance. We huddled together, submerging as much as we could, the air scorching above us. The sound was deafening, a roar of flames mixed with the cracking and crashing of trees. It felt like we were in a giant cauldron, being cooked alive. The smoke made it hard to breathe, the heat unbearable. We kept ducking under the smoky water, every breath a battle. Time lost meaning as we waited for the inferno to pass. I remember looking around at the terror-stricken faces, each of us wondering silently if we'd make it through the night. When the fire finally moved on, devouring everything in its path, we emerged into a scorched alien landscape. Everything was blackened and smoldering, the air thick with the smell of burnt wood and despair. We stumbled out, our bodies trembling, clothes soaked and smeared with ash. It was only then, as dawn began to break, that we realized the 2 hikers who had joined us at the fire were nowhere to be seen. A search party later found them, or what was left, near the path they had likely tried to take to warn others. Surviving that night changed all of us forever. The guilt, the what-ifs, they haunt me. We were warned, and we didn't listen. Nature doesn't care about youthful arrogance. I learned that the hardest way possible. And those voices, their warnings, they echo every time I hear a crackle of dry leaves. A reminder of the night we almost didn't make it out alive. Everyone at camp is waiting for their parents. There's a whole mob of kids, like 50 or something. And it's 3 o'clock, but the place is dead silent. No cars, no parents, nada. We're a day camp that's supposed to close shop at 3 sharp. But by 3:30, it's crickets. This is the first day of camp, so we're all like, did we mess up the time we sent out? But nah, we checked the emails and they all have the correct closing time, saying 3 p.m. Someone's scrolling on their phone and they see the news. There's been this massive bridge collapse. The bridge everyone's parents drive over. Instantly, it's chaos. Kids are freaking out, thinking their parents are dead. What's worse, the camp banned cell phones, so they can't call to check. Pictures start popping up on the counselors' phones. Cars piled up in the river. And word is, people didn't make it. It's not just a bad dream, it's a real nightmare. Then it happens. This chopper just cuts through the sky. Blades chopping up the silence, and the noise just slams over us. It's a deep, thundering sound that you feel in your bones. Kids are stopping, staring up, fingers pointing, mouths hanging open. We're all frozen, watching this beast of a machine descend. The wind from the blades sending dust and leaves swirling around like some kind of twisted snow globe. A cop steps out like he's walking into a storm, which I guess he kinda is. He's this tall dude, uniform all crisp, but his eyes are hard, and his face is set in a grim line. It's like the world's weight is on his shoulders. As he strides over, all official-like, you can just feel the mood drop. Kids start shuffling. Whispers cut through the air, and it's like we all know something's up. Something big. He doesn't have to say a word. His face says it all. There's bad news, the kind that changes everything. He's scanning the crowd, eyes flicking from face to face. Then they settle on her. A little girl. Maybe 7 or 8. She's got these pigtails that are coming undone, and her eyes are too big for her face, all scared and confused. The cop kneels down, and his voice is like this soft rumble, all gentle and careful. "Hey there, can you tell me about your mom and dad? Is there anyone else we can call for you?" The questions hang in the air, heavy and frightening. I'm just standing there, my heart pounding so loud I swear the others can hear it. The girl. She's nodding, her lips trembling. But she ain't making a sound. There's this long moment, and nobody moves. Nobody breathes. We're all just stuck in this snapshot of time, watching this kid's world crumble. I can see it happening. The moment she realizes what's not being said, it's like watching a star fall. Bright one second, gone the next. And there's this twist in my gut because it hits me hard. Her mom and dad are gone, just like that. You read about stuff like this, you see it on TV, but nothing preps you for the real thing. Her eyes well up, tears spilling over. And it's like every one of those tears is etching a line in my brain. Life as she knows it is flipped, reversed, torn to shreds. And for what? Some freak accident. A moment's difference. A twist of fate. It's harsh, it's brutal, and it's painfully, heartbreakingly real.
Jamie was dropped off at middle school early. Today was his 7th grade camping trip. While other kids seemed excited, Jamie was nervous. Not because he'd be spending the next 2 nights in a tent, but because he didn't really have any friends, and this trip might mean some embarrassing moments. Jamie was shy and a little awkward, and while he really wanted to fit in, he just didn't. In his head, he always imagined and hoped how things would play out, but they never did. As he waited for the bus, he noticed everyone else in groups. Sure, there were a few other kids on their own, but he didn't really know how to go up to them. With one hand in his pocket, he nervously clenched a pile of rubber bands. Rubber bands were the current thing. You'd flick them at your friends in a game of tag, and once you hit them, they'd be it. Now, of course, Jamie didn't have anyone to play with, but on the chance the opportunity would come up, he was ready. The bus came and he lined up and got on. Now, most boys were already paired off, and he took the closest seat to the front, hoping whoever sat next to him would have a conversation. As he waited for the seats to fill behind him, 2 teachers sat down opposite. A third gave the bus driver instructions and then barked at the entire bus.
"Sit down! Quiet!"
Immediately, the hustle and bustle came to a silence, and everyone took their seats. Miss Reynolds was mean. With her, you couldn't make any mistakes, or you'd be in detention forever. All the boys were afraid of her, and coined her the nickname, the Witch. Jamie glanced at an empty seat behind him, but before he could do anything, she motioned him towards the window and sat down beside him. The bus doors closed and the engine rumbled. He would have to suffer the entire 4-hour journey next to her. This was terrible. As the bus pulled away from the curb, Jamie pressed his forehead to the window. He watched his school grow smaller until the bus rounded a corner. It then slowed and rolled up next to the girls' school bus. The Witch was from the girls' school on a semester-long exchange. Now, while the boys' school and girls' school were next to each other, there was never any interaction because of a large wall in the middle. Apparently once, the witch caught two boys sneaking over and got them expelled. The girls' bus was identical to the boys' bus in every way, except within were girls. He glanced at the faces he'd never know. Some waved to the boys at the back of the bus. Other girls pretended to ignore that the boys were even there. The girls were going on an overnight camping trip also, close by, but on the other side of an impossible-to-cross river. Jamie scanned the bus. Suddenly, the cutest girl wearing a red scarf smiled back at him. He froze, unsure what to do. She smiled again, then waved warmly. Now, she could be waving to someone else, but it looked like it was to him. Jamie waved back when he felt the seat lighten next to him and sensed a towering shadow over him. In the reflection of the window, he saw the witch point her finger at the girls' bus. The entire bus of girls turned their heads to the front of their bus in fear. The witch sat back down as the bus took off. As Jamie watched the world go by, he thought about the girl with the red scarf. While he'd likely never see her again, he imagined them as friends, playing elastic band tag together. The only good thing about the witch being next to him was it took eyes off of him. He didn't mind being lonely, but he didn't want to sit the whole ride next to an empty seat. And then he would have looked alone. 4 hours went by and the bus passed the Camp Diamond Lake sign. They were close. Suddenly, the bus jolted. A large mechanical clank bellowed below. It felt like something metal had gotten into the engine. The driver hit the brakes and Jamie braced himself quickly. The bus stopped, and Jamie watched the witch rise from her seat and berate the driver. The driver opened the door, and the witch walked out.
Are you coming?
Reluctantly, the driver followed. Jamie watched through the window as the witch and the driver inspected the front wheel. He can tell from their reactions that it wasn't good. The witch strode back onto the bus.
We have a flat.
She checked her cell.
Since there's no reception, I'm gonna walk to the camp and call for assistance. Are you coming?
Reluctantly, the driver followed. Jamie closed his eyes. He knew it would be a long wait. After about an hour, the teachers across from Jamie were quietly arguing.
No, it's been way too long. I'm gonna go look for them.
And with that, a teacher got up and walked out. Jamie watched him disappear into the darkness. Just then, an elastic band whooshed by his head. The remaining teacher, Mr. Johnson, shot to his feet.
Who did that?
The bus quickly quieted down.
I'm serious. Who did that? If you don't tell me, you'll be in detention for a week.
Jamie peered over his chair to see a larger boy, Thatcher, raise his hand.
Over here.
The teacher pointed, indicating he's sitting next to Jamie. Reluctantly, Thatcher walked up to the front of the bus.
How long are we waiting, sir?
Asked another boy.
As long as it takes for them to come back.
Hours must have gone by. Neither the witch, the driver, or the other teacher had returned.
Hey, everyone take your backpacks. You at the back, carry the tents together. We're gonna walk to the campsite.
One by one, everyone got off the bus.
Partner up and follow me.
Jamie looked at Thatcher next to him. Thatcher nodded, indicated he and Jamie would walk together. The group of about 20 boys followed their teacher along the road. On either side, large trees towered above them. Jamie heard someone down the line mention a bear. Another said mountain lions. Someone else mentioned rim spiders. Those were spiders as big as the rim of a toilet seat. And there were pictures floating around the internet of rim spiders just straddling toilets. For a moment, everyone walked in silence. The surrounding darkness lay quiet too. As they approached the campsite, the teacher yelled out,
Hello?
and no one yelled back.
Hello?
Jamie could tell from the teacher's face. He was worried, but was trying hard not to show it.
Set up the tents over there.
The teacher pointed.
6 to a tent.
Jamie followed everyone over. The more athletic boys ripped into their backpacks and pulled out the canvas and poles. Someone handed a pole to Jamie, who passed it off to another boy who seemed to know what to do with it. Jamie glanced to the worried teacher, who was staring off towards a small cement structure.
Anyone need the restroom?
The teacher asked. Looks like even he was too scared to go in there alone. A few boys raised their hands and followed him there. Jamie looked on as the remaining constructed the tents. Someone took out a bag of beef jerky and offered it around. Thatcher took the second to last piece before the bag was emptied and passed to Jamie. Not wanting the spotlight on him, Jamie, embarrassed, pretended to take out a piece and put it in his mouth. Thatcher had noticed. Jamie, seeing this, was about to move away when Thatcher snapped his own piece in half and gave it to Jamie. Jamie nodded.
Thanks.
And Thatcher nodded back. Not a problem. Both their eyes were drawn on the restroom building. The teacher had gone in with the students, but no one had come out.
Where are they?
It was what they were all thinking. A lanky boy stepped forward, stating they'd be out in a minute. But they weren't. A minute became 5. One of them told the lanky boy to go check on them, but he wouldn't. He was too scared.
Chicken.
Not wanting to appear chicken, the lanky boy approached the restrooms. As he got closer, he stopped. The lanky boy gulped. He really didn't want to go in there, but he felt all eyes on him. So he edged forward, slowly, and went around the corner and out of sight. They all heard him yell that no one was in there. Puzzled, they asked if he was sure, but the answer never came. They called out his name, but there was only silence. Thatcher stepped forward. While he was nervous, he was the biggest of them. He told them that as a group, they should go in there together. They all agreed and approached the restrooms. But as they came closer to the entrance, a scared boy stopped, and he backed away from them, terrified. Thatcher knew they had to do it, so he told the scared boy to wait outside and keep guard. Then, together, they entered. A foul smell came from 2 nasty urinals. Jamie looked up to the ceiling where blood-red graffiti stretched across. R.U. A last letter was just a giant splotch covered up. The windows were cracked. Glass lay on the floor. Thatcher and Jamie looked in the cubicles, but they were empty. 8 boys stood in the restroom trying to make sense of it all. Thatcher had no desire to stay. He nudged Jamie, who followed him out the exit. But upon leaving, they froze. The scared boy who was guarding was no longer there. Thatcher turned back to the restroom. None of the other boys had followed them out.
Guys, come on!
But no one replied. Just there and then, Jamie realized he and Thatcher were alone. The eerie silence continued. After 5 minutes of staring at the entrance, determination gripped them. Together they were going to find out what was going on. Slowly, they crept in. No one was in there. It was like they just vanished. Nervously, they both walked out. There were some bags at the edge of the tents. Maybe someone left a cell phone. Jamie and Thatcher approached and rummaged through the backpacks. Jamie noticed something within the tent in front of him. He moved forward and bent down to get a better look. Suddenly, he realized he didn't have eyes on Thatcher. He spun around frantically. Thatcher wasn't there. He was so scared, he couldn't move. Then out of nowhere, he ran all the way back to the bus and then fell to his knees, gasping for breath. Determined, he left the bus and continued running up the road. He got to a fork. He had two options. Go the way the bus came back to the main road, or follow the sign to the Wildwood campground where the girls' campsite was. He saw headlights from a car, and he ran towards it. As he neared, he came across a tow truck lifting a car onto its hooks. Jamie screamed for help as he ran towards the startled tow truck driver, who then ran back to his truck for his radio. Soon after, a sheriff's car rolled up, and Jamie frantically explained what happened. While sympathetic, the sheriff didn't exactly believe him. The sheriff suggested that they drive together to the camp. Jamie shook his head reluctantly. The sheriff didn't give him a choice. Jamie got in the back seat and they drove towards the camp. As they pulled up, wind battered the tents. Everything was the same as Jamie had left it. It was so dark around him. He knew whatever was making people disappear was hiding out there. He peered out the window as the sheriff got out to look around. The sheriff aimed his flashlight to the tent and then to the restroom. Jamie begged him not to go there.
Don't worry, I have a gun.
And as the light from his flashlight disappeared within, it soon faded into complete darkness.
Come out. Come out.
But the sheriff didn't. He still waited.
No.
Nothing. His eyes lingered, but deep inside he knew the sheriff wasn't going to return. He had to get out of there. Jamie climbed over the front seat. The engine was still running and the keys in it. Jamie pressed down on the switch and locked all the doors. He reached for the radio,
Hello?
but only static and white noise came back. He hit another switch. The police siren wailed, and the blue and red lights lit up the campground. But still, the sheriff didn't come out. His eyes glanced at the keys. He'd watched adults driving for him. Maybe he could. He just knew he couldn't stay there. He shifted the car into gear. It shuddered, but pulled forward.
Okay, you can do it. Okay.
Adjusting the wheel, his confidence grew quickly. He drove, very slowly, but he drove away from the campground. As he got to the fork in the road, he noticed the tow truck still there, but there were no signs of the tow truck driver. He hit the brakes. Should he go to the main road or turn towards the girls' campground? The girls' campground was closer, so he spun the wheel in its direction. He came to the Wildwood camping sign. It looked like there was blood on it, but that could have just been mud. The blue and red lights flashing lit up the girls' bus, which lay seemingly abandoned. Ahead were several tents, but they too were dark, and there wasn't any sign of life. Jamie honked, then again, and again. But the girls' campground remained as quiet and eerie as the boys. He drove the car in a U-turn around a tree, and as the headlights again hit the bus, he suddenly slammed on his brakes. On the side of the window of the bus, in Sharpie, was, "Please help me." Jamie honked. He leaned forward, trying to get a better look inside the bus. While it was really dark inside, he could make out something, and it was moving. Whatever it was seemed to move down the aisle of the bus, and then his eyes locked onto the front of the bus. He was on the wrong side of the door. He sensed he was about to see something horrific leap out from around the front, but nothing emerged. Hand smashed against the driver's side window. He shot out of his seat. The car lurched forward, driverless, as Jamie made out a blur of someone or something. But his attention shifted to the ditch ahead. He didn't have time to bail as the car tipped forward, rolled down into a small creek, and stopped suddenly against a large tree. Jamie's seatbelt tightened as he was flung forward, but the restraint kept him safe. His eyes shot to the back window as a figure jumped down into the ditch, and small hands wrapped onto the glass.
Let me in! Let me in!
The girl's voice screamed. He leaned over and hit the unlock, and she got in quickly.
The students, the teachers, they're all gone. They're all gone. They're all gone.
Jamie recognized her school uniform. She was from the girls' school. It sounded like what happened to him happened to her, too.
It happens when I look away.
Jamie knew exactly what she was talking about. Just then, Jamie noticed her red scarf. She was the girl with the red scarf from the bus. She reached into the middle of the car in the console and pulled out some handcuffs. She put the handcuff onto herself and then looked at Jamie. He knew exactly what she wanted to do. He handcuffed himself to her and they clicked the lock shut. For about 20 minutes, they sat there without talking, just keeping the other in eyesight. For the last 10 minutes, Jamie was trying to get up the courage to speak to her.
I saw you on the bus before.
I know, I saw you too.
How's your school?
It's okay. It's kind of hard to make friends, you know what I mean?
Yep, he sure did.
It turns out her name was Eve, and she'd only been going to the school for a few weeks. Deciding to stay handcuffed in the car, they chatted through the night.
Jamie found it really easy to talk to her. And as the sun started to rise, both tried to stay awake. But for just a moment, tiredness got to him, and Jamie closed his eyes.
Suddenly, he realized his mistake.
Panicked, he looked to his side. Eve was still there, asleep. He nudged her awake. Together, they climbed out of the sheriff's car and hiked back to the main road. A puzzled motorist pulled over and soon more police swarmed across the area. For the longest time, Jamie and Eve sat next to each other, insisting that no one remove the handcuffs. But when her parents came, there was no choice. As she was being led away, he didn't know if he would ever see her again.
After 2 weeks, Jamie was to go back to school, but not to the same private school, since they were all still missing.
As his dad dropped him off at his new middle school, Jamie was anxious. He was worried that someone might recognize him from the news, and he didn't want to be singled out. The school was a public school, both girls and boys, and he wasn't really sure how to handle that either. This was all very new to him. As he walked down the hallway, he glanced up from his schedule. No one was paying attention to him. He walked into a classroom and sat down. Just then he heard,
Jamie.
He turned around, and to his amazement, Eve sat there with a huge smile on her face.
Eve? Eve!
Overjoyed, he was about to say something when a stern-seeming teacher entered.
Before we begin, as a reminder, next week we have your 7th grade field trip.
Jamie and Eve exchanged a look. The morning was overcast, a looming sense of urgency filling the air as I packed the car. Between gulps of tepid coffee and half-hearted bites of toast, my thoughts were ensnared by an impending work deadline. It was the kind of morning that felt rushed. The world spinning a tad too fast. My heart pounding in my ears as I urged my son, Jacob, to hurry up. We were late. Again. The drive was a blur. A mixture of honking horns and my son's excited chatter about camp. But the address, a scribbled note stuck to our fridge, now felt like a distant memory, clouded by emails I scrolled through at every red light. A welcome to Elmer Camp sign caught my eye. It was written in Sharpie on a large poster board. The address didn't quite match the scribble on my fridge, but it was close enough. Or so I convinced myself, eager to drop off Jacob and dive back into my work. In front of a quaint, somewhat run-down gate stood 2 figures. A woman, likely in her 40s, offering a warm, if somewhat weary, smile. Beside her, a bald man with a charismatic grin introduced himself as Maggie, the camp's entertainment. His eyes sparkled with mischief. Or was it something darker? I brushed the thought aside, attributing it to my overworked mind. Magician, huh? Jacob will love that, I uttered. More to myself than to them, as I handed over Jacob's bag and watched him trot alongside Maggie into the camp. The woman gave me a nod and I left, the unease settling like dust in the corners of my mind. The day slipped by in a cascade of meetings and deadlines. By the time I glanced at a clock, it was already time to pick Jacob up. I arrived not a minute late, a rarity, but the camp was deserted. No kids, no counselors, no Jacob. The cheerful sign now seemed mocking, swaying slightly in the wind. Panic clawed at my throat as I called out his name, each shout more desperate than the last. That's when I recognized David, a fellow parent I knew from school, driving past. I knew his son was going to Camp Elmer too, but I didn't get why he wasn't stopping here. I jumped in my car and followed him, maybe half a mile. We got to another sign that read, Camp Elmer. I was so confused. I was at another campsite, vibrant and noisy with kids. They said they hadn't seen Jacob. He never checked in, and that this was the only Camp Elmer. My world crumbled right there, in the dusty parking lot of the real Elmer camp. Calls were made. Frantic, tear-filled pleas to the police. They searched, of course. The place where I had left Jacob was not a camp at all. It was nothing but an old lot, overgrown and forgotten. Weeks have turned into an aching blur. I replay that morning over and over. The signs I missed, the details I ignored. I should have been more present, more attentive, not distracted by the relentless demands of work. Every night I stare at the empty bed, the untouched toys, the quiet that has settled heavily in our home. And I hope for a miracle. Somewhere out there is my boy, my heart. And I am haunted by the choices I made that fateful morning. The search continues, and with each passing day I cling to the hope that Jacob will be found. Until then, the fear will never subside. It lingers, a constant reminder of the day my son disappeared into the shadows of a place called Elmer Camp that doesn't exist. And knowing I dropped him off, and might never see him again, will haunt me forever.